Do you consider yourself a high achiever? Smart, driven, highly successful? I am so excited to have you. My name is Julia Arndt and I'm the host of the Stress Podcast. I will help you develop your stress resilience the same way you've developed your workplace superpowers. Learn peak performance tools to thrive at work and in your personal life. Let's get started. Hi everyone and welcome back to the Stress Podcast. I am super excited to welcome my next podcast guest to the show. Hi Heather, how are you today?
I'm great. How are you?
I'm doing great. I am so excited to have you on the podcast today. And the first question that I always ask my podcast guests is, where are you located? What time zone are you in? And what have you been up to this morning?
Oh, Augusta, Georgia. We are East Coast. And this morning I have been interviewing myself. I talked to a guy who studied hyenas out in Kenya and talks about what we can learn from them. Then I talked to a gal out in LA who teaches misalignment and anxiety lessons for creative coaches. So that's what I've been up to besides drinking coffee and talking to my cat.
Very nice. That sounds super interesting and brings me to the first, well, maybe the second question that I have. But before we jump into that second question that's burning on my mind, tell us a little bit about you and what you're doing.
Sure.
So
oh yeah, I'm a wife and a mom and what I call an ambitious creative person. So I got a lot of goals and a lot of dreams, but I'm also very creative and love the entrepreneurial space, but mostly because it gives you what I believe is the time and space to make things. And I love making conversations and creating community for people who feel like me or a little outside of the box and going the unbeaten path. So my background is mental health therapy. I studied at university to become a therapist, got my degree, my license, got 2 job offers, turned them both down and said, no, I want to go do my own thing. And so that was about 4 years ago. And I've played and dabbled in a lot of different stuff. But the consistent theme among it all has been podcasting and getting out audio formed content because it changed my life. And so I'm hoping to create content that helps other people.
Very cool. And so the biggest podcast that you, or like your own podcast, tell us a little bit more about your own podcast that you're running now. Is that what you started 4 years ago or?
Yeah, so we have Unconventional Leaders. So it's all about going the unconventional path and building something awesome. And we're doing that for about 4 years. And we just hit 500 episodes on that. And then I started another show with the Tiny Leaps Big Changes Network. Earlier this year called Happy Brain, and that is a fun mental health podcast. And we're hitting 100 episodes on that this month.
Okay. So cool. And congratulations on those milestones.
Thanks.
500
Thanks. It's a lot of fun.
Wow. Yeah, that's a lot of podcasting.
Yes.
Nice.
Yes.
And then I think what I'm curious about, and probably what listeners are curious about as well, that may be not so familiar with the podcasting space, is probably the question of, is that how you make money? Like, are there like ads on podcasts? Like, how do you make a living?
Yeah. So that is the number one question I get asked of people wanting to start their own show. It's like, okay, well, how do I make money doing it? And there's a couple of different routes. Yes, you can have ads, but when you really understand the volume you need to have on your episodes and the amount of ads that you need to have in order to make any kind of money, to give people a little perspective, it's around 1,000, 1,500 downloads for one ad. And you can make maybe 15, 20, 30 bucks off that. And so, you're looking at tens of thousands to hundreds of thousands of downloads and tons of ads. Everybody always gets mad at podcasters. Go, there's so many ads in this. I'm like, yeah, but do you know how little money they're making unless they have those ad endorsements? So there's that avenue. I've done ads before, but what's been more profitable for me is to advertise my own products on there. And that's what I really encourage people to do. If they have coaching programs or courses, service based, you can go really, really niche, have a smaller audience, but have a high conversion rate there. If you're offering the right product to the right people. So there's that way. But no, there's not riches in podcasting off the bat by any means. I think it's a great long-term brand building piece. And the way that I've looked at it is I do consulting on the side, which gives me time and space and freedom to create podcasts on my own terms where I don't really have to make money off of it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Same for me. I just think it's interesting, the people that I meet. I mean, just
For sure.
what you're saying, like the people that you just talked to this morning, it's like incredible. That's really cool.
Yeah. Yeah. And then getting to read a book and, actually contact the author and get to talk to them. I mean, it's essentially almost free coaching, you know what I mean? Depending on the premise of your show, but you can get so much advice from people you admire, and build relationships with them. There's people I've built relationships with that are, in my inner circle now, which is a big deal.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And so I'm very curious about the Unconventional Leaders podcast. How did you get to think of that, starting that podcast?
Yeah. So I read a lot of personal development and leadership books in school, and I loved them, but they all looked like one type of person. It was normally a white dude in a business suit making some kind of like weird face on the cover. And I was just like, the leadership landscape's a bunch of middle-aged, rich white dudes for the most part, and I didn't see a ton of women. I didn't see a ton of ethnic diversity. I didn't see people with, who are born with a disability. I didn't see people wearing overalls with Converses and painting pictures. I knew all these people were doing some amazing things in the world, but for some reason, the term leadership has been kind of revered as something that's, appointed, or within the corporate space. And I just wanted to, somebody told me once that if something bothers you, maybe that's a hint that it's your job to fix it. Right. And so it really bothered me that I didn't see a lot of representation. So I wanted to create a show for people who weren't corporate America or didn't fall in line with the conventional path, but also knew they had leadership qualities and traits and a desire to make a difference in the world. So that's where the show came from.
Okay. So cool. And I love that you have the background of mental health, right? Therapy, and then kind of combining that now with Unconventional Leaders podcasting. How have you seen the progression and the development of like unconventional leaders maybe paying more attention to mental health in general?
Yeah, great question. This is the thing, especially the online space, with courses and memberships and masterminds and blueprints and freebies and all these, we're just like overwhelmed with information. And the easy thing, and the one that we have all fell victim to, is to think, well, I need to learn something else for my life to change or for me to make progress in my goals. But how many of us, myself included, have courses that we haven't fully finished, or books that we haven't fully read, or all these PDFs that we got for free that we didn't take all the steps? I mean, the information is there. There's a deeper issue going on of why we're not taking the action that we want to take. What's blocking us? Like, what is the fear, the false narratives? I mean, it's all the inner work, which really annoyed me because I didn't want it to be about the inner work, because I'm like, that's boring. That's not fun. Yeah. That's not exciting. Like, I don't want that. But it's interesting because I realized, I'm like, oh, whoa. It's not about information. It's about what I'm doing with what I know to do. And so I think a lot of people are starting to realize that, especially with the pandemic and everything that happened. I always say that the thing that we think is the thing is not the thing, right? And so what is the real thing? A lot of it is mental health related issues.
Yeah, for sure. And so how do you take care of your own mental health?
Oh my goodness. There's so many weird things I do. First of all, the morning times are sacred times for me. So everybody in my family knows not to talk to mama, because I have my coffee and I read and I journal and I meditate and I just have quiet reflection time. That is like sacred to me. I've been practicing lately, doing increments of work time, imperfectly, but where I'm trying to work 53 minutes and take 7 minutes off to move around the house and like pick up or do something different, and just changing my state. I forgot there was some research, like high performance research. You probably know more about than I do.
Yeah, I actually heard 53 minutes too, but I usually thought that it's a 17-minute break. There's a study out there that says the 10% most productive employees at a company work on average 53 minutes and then take 17 minutes of a break before they get back into work.
I've been doing it wrong.
Yeah, 17 minutes.
Try seven, because 7 minutes is
17.
short too. 17 minutes, and they're still the most productive people because they
Interesting.
disconnect, like recharge, and then get back to the next task.
Whoa. Okay. 17 minutes. I need to try that then. But so changing my state, I've since starting Happy Brain, I've really been learning more about the outdoors and how important that is. So getting outside during the day and even going and walking around the block during that 7 minute or now 17 minutes, you can really go around the block. Just stuff like that. Paying attention to your physical health, obviously. I mean, there's so many things we could talk about, but I think just the intention every day that you're aware that that stuff matters, even if it's done imperfectly, that you're paying attention.
Yeah, for sure. What did you learn from learning to be a therapist and counselor, and then actually deciding not to go down that route? But you must have been super curious about, obviously, that subject to study it in school for like what, 3 or 4 years?
Yes. Yes. What I learned in school is that we all need therapy for sure. And what I learned leaving that world is that the traditional education system, a lot of times it's bashed, and I understand why, but I also think we need to start thinking more broadly about its role, because I thought I was leaving that career and I realized I wasn't leaving that career. I was just figuring out how to use that information differently in my own way. And so I use it constantly every day with interviewing people, with consulting, with talking to people, with my own life, with raising girls. I mean, like, it's endless. But I think overall, higher level, I would just encourage anybody to follow their own gut and heart, that if something doesn't feel right for them, that there's so many different paths and there's not a right path. And you can trust your gut.
Yeah. Wow. That's a powerful message. I think sometimes it's so hard to trust your gut, right? I think that's what people struggle the most with, to be like, okay, is that like really a message now? Or is that fear?
Yeah.
You know?
Well, what are people going to think of me? You know, like if I go this path, where's the approval in that? And I know for me, I can only speak for me, there was a lot of insecurity around my position and my role in this world, that I wanted to be seen as successful, and I wanted people to think what I was doing mattered and was cool and worth, hearing about. And those few years at these little get-togethers, and people said, "What are you doing now?" And I'm still stumbling over my words and trying to figure out what I'm doing, because I didn't really know, and I had to figure it out. That was hard, because you're a grown-up and you're supposed to have all this stuff figured out, and you want people to approve of you. And so it was so a lot of pride, like having to suck down my pride and being willing to say, you know what, I might look dumb for a couple of years, but I don't have to prove anything to anybody.
Yeah, for sure. And so Happy Brain, I mean, even both, I feel like Happy Brain and the Unconventional Leaders podcasts, do you see a common theme of what people, maybe from both sides, right? What do conventional leaders do to take care of their mental health? Maybe that's the first question. And then the other question would be, from a Happy Brain perspective, what is maybe 1 or 2 tools that have really surprised you in terms of keeping your brain happy?
I think overall for both of them, I can say that highlighting and focusing on things that uniquely bring you joy and satisfaction is a worthwhile pursuit. And so for the unconventional leaders, like a lot of creative endeavors are, doing things that have no roadmap. Sometimes it seems, or it can feel as though these are selfish pursuits, because they make you happy. And a lot of times we think of success as struggle and pain, and it's supposed to be hard. And choosing something that brings you life, there's a disconnect there sometimes, depending on what environment you grew up in and what you were taught about work and success. And so connecting back to your satisfaction and joy and allowing space for your creative work and believing that that matters and that the world needs that and you can be successful doing it. That is a mental health practice, right? Because I think a lot of times we're struggling because we're not allowing space for that kind of stuff, when we can really fully be Heather Parody, fully be Julia, then we're going to be ignited with something else and be able to do something even cooler in this world. as far as happy brain, there just are no rules, man. Like there's the things people come up with are nuts, like crazy. We've talked about like, some people swear that eating an orange in the shower, like getting a cold orange and eating an orange in the shower will completely change your mental health. Okay. Goat yoga. People love goat
I've heard
yoga.
about goat yoga. Uh-huh.
Yeah. A 6-second kiss. Like there's been research done by the Gottman Institute that in your relationships, kiss for 6 seconds when you're leaving, because it's a little bit of intimacy throughout those transitions in your day that bring you closer together with your partner. There's just these weird little things.
It makes sense though, I feel like, no?
Yeah. It's interesting. It's interesting. It's things you never think of, but I think the underlying theme of it all again is introducing joy and fun and play into the little minute parts of your day. Someone just told me on the last interview, she said something along the lines of, we're so focused on intensity without focusing on frequency. And it's not about intensely feeling things all the time. It's about the frequency of allowing tiny bits of joy throughout your day. So even small things like, paying attention to, my desk here, that I picked this mouse pad because it makes me happy and it's bright and it's pretty. And I have this plant here because it reminds me of outside. And I have little kid markers on my whiteboard that make me feel like I'm 5, but they bring me a little bit of joy and happiness, and stuff like that matters.
Mm-hmm. And as a educated therapist, like when you sometimes hear these things, are you like, okay, like nope. Mental health in a non-traditional, conventional things?
I believe it more.
Okay.
I think used to, if I hadn't been trained in therapy, I would have scoffed at it and thought how ridiculous it was. But when you're sitting with someone who is struggling so hard to find the tiniest ounce of hope in their life, and you realize that they don't need a life overhaul, they just need a tiny piece of hope for today to get through today, you realize how these small little things can be a lifeline for people in their darkest hour. And how they can be the building blocks for those of us who are, in a mentally better place to really create joy and happiness. And that's what we're really after. So no, there's a lot of depth to it if you really dig in. Yeah,
very cool. What are some books on your bookshelf that are not finished reading yet?
Oh, like a ton. A ton. Right now I'm going through Bear Grylls' autobiography. The guy who does, what is it? It's National Geographic's Running Wild with Bear or whatever. I don't know. I've been trying to get into more biographies lately because I've been such a self-help junkie for years that I'm like trying to wean myself off of it. I'm reading Pocket Full of Money, or Happy Pocket Full of Money. It's an affirmational book about money mindset. I'm also reading Outwitting the Devil by Napoleon Hill, which I've read multiple times, but I go back and reread that book quite a bit.
I'm reading.
And there's countless.
The book from Napoleon Hill at the moment. Yeah.
Think and Grow Rich.
Yeah, Think and Grow Rich.
Have you read that before?
I haven't read it before. I'm in the process.
Really? What do you think?
Starting it.
What do you think?
I mean, I just think it's so powerful because this guy wrote this book in the 1930s, and it's still so relatable. And I've been in like personal development, self-help space now, I would say also for 4 or 5 years, that I've really shown interest, and then started my business 2.5 years ago. And it's just like, I feel like when you know so many things, it just brings everything back together. How he talks about desire, and like, you really want something and then you can be successful and you just need to stick to it. And then he talks about the energies and how you need to feel and think at the same time. And I'm like, Joe Dispenza is talking about this. And like, I feel like everyone, or like you read the other book that I just read is Law of Attraction by Esther Hicks and her husband.
I just started getting into Esther Hicks.
And it's always the same thing. It's like nobody's actually reinventing the wheel. Like nobody's actually sharing new information. It's always the same thing, just in a different perspective, or a different almost voice, but the exact same thing. So it's just, I think it just highlights the power of doing these things. For me, it's always just the the confirmation of I'm doing the right things. Or like, am I doing them yet? I don't know. Maybe I'm not doing them yet. Like, maybe I know all of these things, like you said as well, right? I think we know a lot of things. There's an overload of information out there nowadays of what we can do, but do we actually do it? You know? And so yeah.
And have you read Outwitting the Devil?
Mm-mm.
Okay, so the one of the main concepts in that book is about drifting and how we kind of live in this state where a good example is, you know, you're driving in your car to go somewhere and then you look up and you're there and you're kind of like, I don't even remember driving here. And stuff like that happens all the time where we're just kind of going throughout our day and you look and 2 hours have gone by and sometimes it's like a flow state and you're really in the zone. But a lot of times, you know, Napoleon Hill describes it as drifting. So you're kind of like in this unconscious blur fog in your life where there's just not attention, you know, and definiteness of purpose is what he, you know, talks about. And that's what I've been thinking and trying to pay a lot more attention to lately is just, you know, back to those transitions throughout your day. You know, are we being intentional with refocusing on our task at hand, asking ourselves, why am I doing what I'm doing right now? And just being more deliberate with the day, because it is this weird fog that I feel like society gets in where we don't really know what we're doing or why we're doing it. We're just kind of like in this weird conveyor belt.
Yeah.
And I could get really deep and weird with that, but
I'm like, Heather, have you read The Law of Attraction?
I haven't. I started listening to Abraham Hicks about 2 months ago, and I went through that entire podcast that she has. Has like 200 episodes in it, but it blew my mind.
Yeah, because they talk about the 3 universal laws, which is law of attraction, law of deliberate creation, and the law of allowing.
Yes.
And within the law of I don't know if it's the within the law of allowing or if it's the 4th law, which is the law of segment intending. They talk about exactly that, what you just said, that we are just kind of drifting through the day and that we're like just not intentional anymore about what we're doing. And they talk about the power of setting an intention every time we go into the next thing. So when you wake up in the morning, like it's a segment, and so you're in whatever you intend for the segment, you set that intention, and then you go sit in the car. And you know, I think it really helps me because the question is always like, what is your intention with this? And I feel like so many people, right, sit in the car and they get so distracted, right? They like are on their phone, maybe they listen to a podcast, but then they also check their messages or on a call with someone and have a million different thoughts. And obviously, like, again, when we talk about the law of attraction, which is like the highest law, right? And then they basically say you need to master the law of attraction first, and then you can only start mastering the law of deliberate creation and the law of allowing, or the law of allowance. And they say we are just too overwhelmed with too many things. We have there's just too much confusion in our heads of all the things that we want and all the things that we think about. And so they basically created the segment intending to every time you have a meeting with someone. For example, I have a podcast interview with you. What is my intention to get? What do I want to get out of this podcast? How do I want to show up, to be like really deliberate and intentional about it? And I thought it's really powerful.
How would you decipher between I'm going to set an intention for my morning, let's say, versus a to-do list?
I think it's a big difference. I think the intention, the to-do list is simple, right? My to-do is, for example, today I like record 2 podcasts and then I post all my social media content. I go through my emails. Those are my 3 to-dos. And then I am intentional about this by being clear on my to-do list, right? But then also to not get distracted and to be intentional with while I am recording an interview with you, I am not checking my phone, or I'm not doing this and I'm not doing that. So for me, that's more the intention piece of how am I going to show up, and how, like, what kind of, it's almost like also the quality of how, like the quality is so much higher when you're so intentional about being focused on that specific task during that time before moving on to the next one, which I think is also what so many people do. They just drift. And like, I mean, I worked in corporate for 8 years almost, and like we would sit in a meeting and a million people would do a million other things, and then it's like, why did I even join this meeting in the first place? I think that's how people drift nowadays, probably as well.
Well said.
Yeah.
That's good.
Well, I'm really enjoying this conversation. I feel like we could probably talk about a few other books, but I think what we did achieve in this podcast interview is to make people curious about both of your podcasts, the Unconventional Leader, and the Happy Brain podcast. So make sure to check it out. Is there one book that actually changed completely your life that you've read multiple times?
Oh man, there's so many. I'll say The War of Art by Steven Pressfield is a newer book that really had a deep impact on me. And I'll tell you why. The first half of it addresses what a lot of books do and a lot of teachings do, which is fear and imposter syndrome and what keeps us back and all that stuff. But what got me really curious was the second half of the book that I don't hear as much about. I'm getting into this world, but it's about listening to what's on the other side of fear and the dark and all of that. Like when we get quote past, I don't know if we get past it, when we move through that, what's on the other side of that, which is creation and hearing that still small voice and muse and like inspiration and creativity. And he talked a lot about kind of the spiritual connectiveness in order for us to get downloads of things. And it just opened up a world for me because I'm always like trying to combat things as opposed to your point earlier, realizing that there's something coming in that I could allow. And our focus so much is sometimes fighting against what we don't want, that we occupy the space that could be giving us something, right? And so that's a really good book, and I hadn't read it before. Nice. I know it's a classic.
Cool. I have not read the book either. You might be very curious. I might
it's good. You'd like it.
Cool. Well, Heather, thank you so much for being on the show today.
This was fun.
Pleasure. Yes, this was super fun. And yeah, I wish you all the best. If people want to, obviously Unconventional Leaders and Happy Brain, those would be the two podcasts to find you at. But if they want to get in touch with you, how would they best do that?
Sure. So I'm super active on TikTok and Instagram at Heather Parody. I love both those platforms. So right there.
Okay, perfect. All right, Heather. Well, I wish you a wonderful rest of your day, and hopefully talk to you soon again.
Sounds great.
Bye.